I always thought that when the past finally caught up with me, it would arrive the way monsters in childhood nightmares do, creeping through a crack in the door, or whispering beneath the bed, or lingering in the corner of a dim hallway. Quiet, inevitable, impossible to ignore, yet somehow gentle in its approach, like it wanted to give me one last chance to run before it bared its teeth. But life doesn't have the mercy of a child's imagination, and my past did not creep, whisper, or linger. It slammed into me with the brutal efficiency of a hospital phone ringing at 2 a.m, shattering the fragile illusion that I had managed to build for myself over the last 3 years. An illusion held together with borrowed courage, bad decisions, and the naive hope that distance could ever save me from a man like him. The sound of the phone tore into the hospital room, shrill and demanding, bouncing off sterile walls and vibrating through my skull. And for a moment I wondered if it was possible for a single noise to undo months of hiding, if the universe could be so cruelly poetic as to choose this exact moment, while I lay bruised, aching, and strapped to an IV drip, to remind me that freedom in my world is nothing more than a temporary misdirection. I let it ring once, thinking the nurse would answer it, or that it was meant for someone else. Because in places like this, no one ever calls for people like me, people who drift in with half-conscious apologies and leave without explanations. People who don't have family, who don't have friends who know the truth, who don't even have a real name most days. But the ringing only grew louder, more insistent, as if the phone itself knew I was awake, knew I was listening, knew that running wasn't an option anymore. By the third ring, dread pooled hot and heavy just beneath my ribs, a slow-moving panic that felt almost familiar, almost comforting, because I had lived with it for so long that it became a companion of sorts, a reminder that I once belonged to something dark and dangerous and intoxicating. And even now, when I could barely lift my head from the pillow, I knew exactly who would be on the other end of that phone if I dared to answer it. But I didn't have to. The nurse rushed in, breathless and apologetic, clutching the phone like it was something fragile and explosive all at once. And when she said my name, my real one, the one I hadn't used in years, every muscle in my body locked with the sharp, biting cold of recognition. "Miss Petrova," she said, glancing nervously at the caller ID. "Your emergency contact is on the line." My blood ran cold, thickened, then froze entirely, because I had forgotten, not purposefully, not strategically, but out of sheer desperation. The one piece of paperwork I never updated, the one thread tethering me to a world I had severed myself from. And that thread, delicate and dusty from years of abandonment, had suddenly snapped taut, again, pulling me back with ruthless precision. "No," I croaked, the word tasting like rusted metal. "There must be a mistake. I didn't list anyone." The nurse shook her head, sympathetic but firm, and held the phone out to me with the quiet insistence of someone who doesn't understand the danger wrapped inside that simple gesture. "He says his name is—" She didn't even get to finish, because I heard it. His voice. Low, smooth, deadly. A voice that had once felt like home and ruin at the same time. Elena. Just my name, spoken in the way only he ever said it. Slow, deliberate, with an ownership that seeped beneath the skin and refused to be washed away. And suddenly I was 22 again, breathless and infatuated, caught between wanting to melt into him and wanting to run from him, unsure which instinct would destroy me faster. I closed my eyes, but it didn't help. If anything, the darkness made him feel closer. "Are you alive?" he asked, the question sounding more like a threat than a concern. "Or should I start arranging a funeral?" The nurse's eyes widened, but I barely noticed because the room seemed to tilt and spin, rushing with memories I had buried deep beneath layers of fear and regret. "I didn't want them to call you," I whispered, gripping the phone with trembling fingers, wishing I could wrap myself in silence instead of his voice. "I didn't mean for you to—" "To what?" he interrupted, voice thick with irritation and something else I couldn't quite decipher. To find out you're bleeding in some hospital? To find out someone laid their hands on you? To find out you're still alive despite every effort you made to disappear? His anger curled around me like smoke, intoxicating and suffocating, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe, forgot how to think, forgot everything except the sound of him. You shouldn't be calling me, I managed, even though my voice broke. You shouldn't be anywhere near me. Too late, he replied, and I could practically hear him stepping into a car, issuing orders to men who would follow him into hell without hesitation. I'll be there in 20 minutes. No, I hissed, suddenly terrified. Do not come here. Elena. Just one word, but it shut me up instantly. You listed me, he said, voice steady, dangerous, final. You might have forgotten, but that doesn't matter. You made me your emergency contact. That means you wanted me to come. That was years ago, I whispered, choking on the weight of my own stupidity. I forgot to remove... It doesn't matter, he repeated. I'm coming. The line went dead. The nurse, oblivious to the storm she had just helped unleash, gave me a pitying smile and gently took the phone from my hand. But her kindness felt like an insult. Because the last thing I needed was softness when I knew what kind of violence was heading my way. I lay there, heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape, and for the first time since I left him, since I vanished from his world in the middle of the night, clutching secrets so dangerous they could topple entire empires, I realized I might have been a fool to think I could outrun a man like him. Because he wasn't merely a man. He was a storm dressed in a tailored suit, a weapon forged from hunger and loyalty and vengeance, a man who didn't understand the concept of letting go, not even when it came to women who betrayed him, especially not when it came to me. Minutes passed, slow, agonizing minutes, each one heavy with the knowledge that he was getting closer, that his presence would swallow this quiet little hospital whole, that every door would open for him and every person would instinctively step back, not out of respect, but out of survival. Every hum of the fluorescent lights felt like an omen. Every beep of the heart monitor felt like a warning. Every footstep in the hallway made my pulse spike with fear. I pressed my palm to my chest, willing my heartbeat to steady, because I needed to think clearly, needed to figure out what to say, how to behave, how to survive the ice-cold fury I knew he'd be carrying the moment he walked through those doors. What would he see when he looked at me? The bruises on my ribs, the cut on my lip, the dried blood beneath my fingernails, proof that someone had finally caught up with me, that someone had come dangerously close to finishing what I ran from. Would he think I deserved it? Would he think I earned it? Would he want to finish it himself? No. No, that wasn't him. Not with me. That was the problem. When it came to the world, he was a monster. But when it came to me, he was something far more terrifying. He was human. The sliding doors at the end of the hallway opened with a soft whoosh, and even from my room I felt the shift, the way the air tightened, the way the quiet murmur of voices cut off abruptly, the way the atmosphere seemed to hold its breath, because that's the effect he had on people, entering a space the way a wildfire enters a forest, silently at first, but with the promise of destruction. I didn't see him immediately, but I didn't have to. I felt him before I heard him, and I heard him before I saw him, his steps slow and deliberate, his presence unmistakable, his shadow stretching down the hall long before he appeared in the doorway. And when he did, when my eyes finally rose to meet his, I almost forgot the pain in my side, the throbbing cut on my forehead, the fear lodged in my lungs. He looked the same. Infuriatingly the same. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in charcoal black, that made his eyes, those deep, dangerous, dark eyes, burn like embers in the dim hospital lighting. His jaw was tight, his mouth a thin, unforgiving line, his expression carved from stone and rage and something else I couldn't decipher. Something that made my throat tighten. He shut the door behind him with a soft click that felt louder than any gunshot. And then he spoke. "Elena," he said, walking toward my bed with the kind of slow, measured control that meant he was seconds from unleashing hell. "Who did this to you?" The question, so simple, so sharp, pierced straight through my defenses. I opened my mouth to answer, but no sound came out. He stood at the edge of the bed, towering over me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence thick with 3 years of unfinished conversations and unspoken accusations and memories we had both tried, and failed, to bury. "You shouldn't have come," I whispered finally, forcing the words past the knot in my throat. "And you," he said quietly, brushing a stray strand of hair from my cheek with a touch that was far too gentle for a man like him. "Shouldn't have given them my name." I swallowed hard, unable to look away. "I forgot," I said, though the excuse sounded pathetic even to me. His lips twitched, not in amusement, not in disbelief, but in something deeper, darker, more dangerous. "No," he murmured, leaning closer. "You don't forget me, Malishka." His voice, low and intimate, washed over me like a bruise being pressed, painful and familiar and frighteningly addictive. I wanted to argue, I wanted to shout, I wanted to lie, I wanted to pretend I hadn't thought of him every night since I left. But then he lifted his hand, gently tilting my chin so I had no choice but to meet his gaze. And the look in his eyes, raw, furious, concerned in a way he never allowed anyone else to see, stole every word from my lips. Someone cleared their throat in the hallway, but he ignored it, stepping even closer, claiming the space around me as though he still had the right. "Elena," he said, softer this time, the softness somehow more terrifying than the anger. "Tell me who hurt you." I opened my mouth. I almost said it. I almost told him the truth about the men who attacked me, the ones who had chased me for months, the ones who wanted something I couldn't give. But then I remembered why they wanted me in the first place. I remembered the secret I carried, the secret I ran with, the secret that would destroy him if he knew. So instead I lied. "I don't know," I whispered. "I didn't see their faces." His jaw clenched, eyes darkening in a way that sent a ripple of fear through me. Not because he looked angry, but because he looked like he was about to declare war. He straightened, stepping back, his expression turning cold and unreadable. "Get some rest," he said, voice clipped. "We'll talk when you're stable." "Talk about what?" I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. His gaze locked onto mine with chilling finality. "About why someone is trying to kill you," he said, "and why you thought you could face it alone." He turned toward the door and paused, hand on the eye handle, shoulders tense, voice low enough to make goosebumps rise along my arms. "And Elena," he added, not bothering to look back, "if you lie to me again, I'll know." The door closed behind him. My heart wouldn't stop pounding. My past wasn't just back. It was standing guard outside my hospital room, waiting, watching. And I knew, God, I knew, that when he walked back in, I would have to choose between the truth that could shatter him and the lie that could get me killed. And that is why, despite every instinct screaming otherwise, I didn't sleep at all that night, because tomorrow he would demand answers, and I no longer had anywhere left to run. If there was one thing I learned from the years I spent wrapped in the dangerous warmth of his world, it was that silence, true, heavy, suffocating silence, was rarely ever a sign of peace. And the silence that settled over the hospital after he left my room felt like a storm holding its breath. Like the entire building somehow knew that a man like him didn't walk into a place like this without leaving a trail of consequences, visible or invisible, and that soon, very soon, the fragile calm would shatter with the same terrifying ease as a glass dropped from trembling hands. I lay awake the entire night, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, tracing each jagged line like it was a map leading me backward in time, back through years of running, back through nights spent in motel bathrooms trying to scrub fear off my skin, back through memories that clung to me like cobwebs, sticky and impossible to fully brush away. And with every hour that crept by, the ache in my ribs grew sharper, the pounding behind my eyes heavier, the trembling in my hands more difficult to hide, because I knew what morning would bring. And I wasn't ready. God, I wasn't remotely ready for the confrontation waiting in the shadows outside my door. The sun had barely risen when the door creaked open again, not abruptly, not carelessly, but with a deliberate slowness that instantly told me it wasn't a nurse or a doctor or anyone who came with kindness in mind. And when I turned my head, my breath caught. Not because I was surprised. His shadow had been lingering beneath the door for hours, but because he had the audacity to look almost calm, as though the version of him who had bled violence into the hallway last night had been tucked away beneath that immaculate suit. He walked in without speaking, without acknowledging the nurse who had been taking my vitals, without offering the slightest hint of warmth or anger, or anything decipherable, and instead he just stood by the window, staring out at the city as if trying to decide which part of it he was willing to burn first. The nurse, clearly unnerved by the tension radiating off him, finished her work with trembling fingers, offered me a weak smile, and hurried out, closing the door behind her, as though she were afraid the air inside the room might explode. I waited. He waited. The silence stretched so long I began to wonder if he was giving me one final chance to speak, before he forced the truth from me with methods I knew far too well. Methods that weren't cruel for cruelty's sake, but were terrifying in their efficiency. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "You didn't sleep." He didn't ask. He stated it, as if reading the exhaustion hanging beneath my eyes. I swallowed hard, shifting against the stiff pillows. "Hard to sleep when someone like you is pacing outside my door," I said, though my voice wavered, betraying the fear I desperately tried to hide. He turned then, slow and deliberate, and his gaze, dark, sharp, unreadable, locked onto mine like a blade slipping between ribs, and I felt something inside me twist, because he had always been able to look straight through me, past every shield, every lie, every version of myself I tried to present. "You still lie badly," he murmured, taking a step toward the bed. I hated the way my pulse reacted, hated the way my lungs seemed to forget their purpose, hated the way my body remembered him even after all the miles I'd put between us. But he noticed. Of course he noticed, because his eyes flicked to the curve of my throat, watching the frantic flutter of my pulse with a quiet intensity that would have set anyone else to trembling. "Tell me what happened," he said, no softer than last night, but no harsher either, his voice settling into that dangerously calm tone he used when he was deciding between patience and violence. "I told you," I whispered, forcing the lie up my throat like thorns. "I didn't see their faces." He stared at me for a long moment. Too long, long enough for panic to crawl beneath my skin, long enough for me to realize he wasn't angry that I was lying. He was angry that I thought he wouldn't notice. He stepped closer, pulling a chair toward the bed, flipping it so he could lean forward, elbows on his knees, eyes level with mine. The posture was deceptively casual, but I knew better. This was his interrogation stance, the one that had made grown men confess to crimes they hadn't even committed. "Elena," he said, voice lowering to a slow, velvety threat. "You and I both know you don't get beaten in an alley by faceless strangers. You don't get hunted by ghosts. Someone targeted you, and unless I know who, I can't protect you." I stiffened. There it was. The word I feared more than any other. Protect. Because protection from him wasn't freedom, wasn't safety, wasn't relief. It was a cage lined with velvet, strong enough to hold mountains, and once inside, no one ever truly left. "You don't need to protect me," I said, forcing steadiness into my tone even as my hands trembled beneath the blanket. "I've survived 3 years without you." His jaw tightened, the smallest flicker of emotion cracking through the ice. "You call this surviving?" he asked, reaching forward before I could react, gently taking my wrist and turning it so he could see the bruises marring my skin. "Because this looks a hell of a lot like dying." The way he touched me, slow, deliberate, careful, sent a rush of memories through me. Memories of nights when he traced my skin as though memorizing every inch. Memories of mornings when his fingertips lingered on my hips long after the sun had risen. Memories of a version of him that the world never saw. I pulled my wrist back, harder than I intended, ignoring the flash of pain that shot through me. "This is exactly why I didn't want you coming here," I snapped, the crack in my voice threatening to become a sob. "You think everything is a war you need to win, but this is just my life." "No," he growled, leaning closer. "This is what's left of your life after you ran from me." Anger flared in my chest, sharp and tear-bright. "I didn't run from you," I hissed. "I ran for you." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and instantly I regretted it, instantly wished I could pull them back, because his expression changed, subtly but undoubtedly. Confusion flickering with suspicion, suspicion intertwining with something almost like hope, the combination dangerous in ways I couldn't begin to navigate. "For me?" he repeated, voice softening in a way that terrified me more than if he'd shouted. I looked away, staring at the window, at the pale morning light creeping across the floor, at anything that wasn't the intensity of his gaze. "It doesn't matter now," I whispered. "I just need to leave and you can go back to your life and pretend you never got that call." He laughed then, a quiet, humorless sound that made my stomach knot. "Pretend?" he echoed. "You think I could walk away from seeing you like this? Walk away from the fact someone dared put their hands on you?" "Yes," I said, even though every part of me knew it wasn't true. "You're good at walking away from things that don't serve you." His eyes hardened, darkened, sharpened, and for a moment I feared I'd pushed too far. "You think I ever wanted to walk away from you?" he asked, voice a low, simmering whisper. "You think I didn't tear apart half the city looking for you the night you disappeared?" My breath hitched. "You didn't find me," I said, a weak defense even to my own ears. "No," he whispered, leaning forward, his face inches from mine. "You made sure I wouldn't." His nearness hit me like a blow, memories sharpened by proximity, by the scent of him, clean, sharp, expensive, memories of nights in his arms, of his voice against my neck, of secrets shared in the dark when neither of us knew the cost. "I don't want to do this with you," I whispered, turning my face away, because if I looked at him I would break. "Not now." He reached out, gently cupping my chin and turning me back to him, forcing my gaze to meet his. "We're already doing this," he said, "whether you like it or not." Something in me cracked then, a hairline fracture in the wall I'd so carefully built. "You want the truth?" I whispered, tears burning at the edges of my vision. "You think you can handle it?" His grip on my chin tightened slightly. "Try me." I exhaled slowly, the kind of exhale that feels like surrender, like peeling open old wounds. "Someone came after me because they think I have something that belongs to them," I said, choosing my words carefully, weaving truth with omission the way I'd learned to survive. "They've been following me for months." His eyes narrowed. "Who?" "I don't know exactly," I lied, because saying the Velasco name aloud would set him on a path I wasn't ready for, a path that led straight to the secret I had hidden for 3 years. They appear, they disappear, they threaten, They leave warnings. You should have come to me. The anger in his voice was edged with something softer. Hurt, maybe, but I pushed it away. I couldn't, I whispered. You mean you wouldn't, he corrected sharply. I shook my head, blinking through the dizziness creeping up my spine. You don't understand. Then explain it, he demanded. Explain why you chose to bleed in a hospital bed instead of asking the one person capable of protecting you. My heart thudded painfully. I couldn't tell him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because telling him meant unraveling everything. I needed to stay hidden, I murmured. And you shine too bright. You burn too hot. You draw attention even when you try not to. He stared at me, studying every micro-expression like he was piecing together a puzzle only he understood. You're still not telling me everything, he said. I've told you enough, I said weakly. No, he murmured. You've told me just enough to know you're in deeper danger than you think. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor, startling me. I'm checking you out of this hospital, he said, already moving toward the door. You can barely stand, but you're safer with me than here. No. I tried to sit up, but pain lanced through my ribs, stealing my breath. I can't go with you. You don't have a choice, he said, turning back with a look that brooked no argument. You're coming with me. Fear surged through me, not fear of him, but fear of what being near him would force into the light. I'm not yours anymore, I whispered, heart breaking with the lie. He paused, hand resting on the doorknob, back to me, shoulders tense. When he spoke, his voice was low, controlled, unbearably dangerous. You're still mine everywhere it matters. He opened the door. And then, without turning around, rest while you can, Elena. Because once you leave this room, everything changes. The door shut with a soft, final click. I sank back against the pillow, heart pounding with a terror I hadn't felt in years, because I knew, deep in my bones, that the moment he took me from this hospital, the life I had built, the secrets I protected, the fragile distance I created, would all come crashing down. And worse. There was no way he wouldn't discover the truth soon. The truth that would ignite a war. The truth I had been running from for 3 years. The truth that shared his blood. And that is why, as the morning light filled the room, I finally admitted to myself that once he pulled me back into his world, there would be no escaping him again. Not without losing everything. There's a peculiar sensation that takes hold of a person when they know, truly know, that they are about to be taken somewhere they swore they would never return to. Something like the slow, crushing awareness of standing on the edge of a cliff you once fell from and survived only by chance. The wind against your back, whispering warnings while the pull of gravity beckons you down with a familiarity that feels both lethal and strangely comforting. And as the early morning light seeped through the thin hospital curtains, and the quiet hum of machines filled the room, like a lullaby designed to keep patients complacent, I felt that sensation wrapping itself around my ribcage, squeezing, reminding me that despite everything I had endured during the 3 years I spent running, the real danger had always been waiting, not in the shadows behind me, but in the form of the man who now roamed the hallway just outside, waiting for the moment he could escort me back into a world where my name, my safety, my choices, and my heart were no longer solely my own. The door opened again, before I could collect myself into something resembling resolve, and he entered with the same quietly devastating presence he always had, his expression hard enough to carve through steel, and his posture relaxed in the way predators relaxed, coiled readiness disguised as calm, a tranquil surface concealing the certainty that violence was never more than a breath away. He didn't speak at first, merely stood at the foot of the bed with that unreadable intensity, as if assessing whether I was capable of walking or would need to be carried. And I hated, truly hated, how some part of me reacted to that unspoken consideration. that familiar assurance that he would always make sure I reached wherever he intended me to go, whether I liked the destination or not. "We're leaving," he said at last, his voice low and steady, as though the decision had never been mine to begin with, as though the world existed in two states, when he had decided, and when his decision had not yet been enforced. "I'm not ready," I whispered, though readiness was irrelevant in this moment, and we both knew it. He cocked his head slightly, eyes narrowing in, that way that meant he was deciphering the truth beneath the surface of my words. Fear, hesitancy, reluctance. But not weakness, never weakness, because if there was one thing he had always known about me, it was that I did not break easily, and whatever damage clung to my body now was not a reflection of fragility, but of circumstance. "You're ready enough," he said, with a finality that made my stomach twist, and then he held out a hand toward me. Not a request, not an invitation, but an expectation. A silent command wrapped in the illusion of choice. I stared at that hand longer than I should have, remembering the hundreds of times I had taken it before, back when I belonged to his world, back when the warmth of his palm had been my lifeline through darkness, back when I mistook possession for devotion and control for protection. And though every logical part of me screamed not to touch him, not to let him pull me back into orbit, my fingers still twitched, traitorous and aching, wanting the familiarity even as my mind begged me to resist. "No," I said finally, forcing the word out with more force than the weak whisper I expected. But his expression didn't change, didn't falter, didn't soften. Instead, he lowered his hand only to circle the bed and stand beside me, reaching for the railing with practiced ease and lowering it slowly, his movements methodical and quiet, as though he had done this before. Helped injured people out of hospital beds, helped them stand when their bodies protested, helped them move whether they wanted to or not. But I knew the truth. He had never done this for anyone but me. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he murmured, one hand sliding behind my back, the other gripping my forearm, lifting me with a tenderness at complete odds with the cold command in his voice. Pain shot through my ribs, sharp and hot, and I hissed, trying to shift away, but he tightened his hold, steady but gentle, refusing to let me fall or retreat or collapse into the bed again. "Easy," he murmured, his breath brushing the shell of my ear as he steadied me. "You push too hard, you'll tear something." "Maybe I want to tear something," I said through clenched teeth, trying to force some distance between us, but the attempt was laughably useless. He held me firmly, anchoring me as though my body were something precious he refused to let slip. He didn't respond to my defiance, at least not verbally, but the way his hand pressed against my lower back made it abundantly clear what he thought of my attempt at resistance. That it was flimsy, ineffective, expected, and ultimately irrelevant. It took several moments for the dizziness to subside, several shallow breaths before the room stopped tilting, and when I finally managed to lift my head, he was watching me closely, eyes narrowed in concentration, lips pressed into a line of frustrated restraint. "Can you walk?" he asked, although there was no real question in his tone, only a practical assessment. "I can manage," I said, though my legs trembled beneath me. "We'll see," he murmured, slipping an arm around my waist in a way that felt both infuriatingly intimate and maddeningly necessary. "I don't need your help," I snapped, even as my body leaned into him in betrayal of the words. "You need it more than you want to admit," he countered softly, guiding me toward the door with slow, steady steps. "And I'm not about to watch you collapse just to prove a point." Humiliation burned through me, hot, sharp, and humiliatingly familiar, because once upon a time he had supported me exactly like this, guiding me through rooms filled with men who would have killed me if he hadn't made it clear what I was to him. And now, years later, despite everything I had done to sever the connection between us, My body still moved with his as though shaped to fit the contours of his presence. The hallway outside fell silent the moment we stepped into it. Nurses pausing mid-step. Doctors glancing up from charts. A few patients blinking in sleep-addled confusion. And every pair of eyes held that same mixture of caution and curiosity, and something dangerously close to fear. Because even without announcing himself, even without lifting a hand or raising his voice, he commanded attention with the ease of a man who built power the same way others built breathing. Naturally, instinctively, unavoidably. I hated the way people made room for us as we passed. Hated the way they stepped aside in that subtle, instinctive manner that humans adopt when sensing a predator nearby. Hated that he seemed to breathe easier as we left the hospital wing behind us, as though stepping back into the world restored a part of him that had been forced into dormancy inside the sterile, controlled environment of the hospital. "Everyone is staring," I muttered, keeping my gaze forward so I wouldn't have to see the faces around us. "They always stare," he said simply. "It's not you. It's me." "That's not comforting," I hissed, gripping the railing of the elevator as he guided me inside. "It's not meant to be comforting," he replied, pressing the button for the ground floor. "It's meant to be true." The elevator doors slid shut, and the small space filled with the heavy electric tension that always surfaced when we were alone. The air thick with unsaid words, unhealed wounds, and unspoken memories that rested just beneath the surface of our shared silence, ready to burst forth with the slightest provocation. His hand remained on my waist, steady and warm, even though I no longer needed the support. And when I tried to shift away, his grip tightened in a way that was subtle yet unmistakable. A silent reminder that I wasn't going anywhere without him. "You're trembling," he said. Not a question, not an observation, but a quiet, unavoidable truth. "I'm cold," I lied, even though the warmth of his body seeped through the thin hospital gown. "You're scared," he corrected. I turned my head away, staring at the polished metal wall of the elevator, seeing the faint reflection of us together. Me, pale and fragile. Him, dark and unyielding. And the image felt like a cruel painting of who we had once been and could never be again. "What I'm feeling doesn't matter," I murmured, voice cracking. "It matters to me," he said, and the sincerity in his tone made my heart trip painfully against my ribs. "Please don't do that," I whispered, closing my eyes. "Don't pretend you still—" "I'm not pretending," he said softly. The elevator dinged, the doors sliding open, releasing us from the suffocating intimacy, but not from the tension strung taut between us. His men waited outside. 3 of them. All broad, armed, and unmistakably loyal, their eyes relaxing the moment they saw him and sharpening instantly when they saw me. Her return, their expressions seemed to say, carries complications. His hand remained at my waist as he guided me forward, the men stepping aside with silent acknowledgement, and I could practically feel their confusion radiating in my direction, because they all knew who I was, or who I had been, his woman, his secret weakness, his greatest betrayal. And my sudden reappearance was not something they would take lightly. "Is the car ready?" he asked, his voice shifting seamlessly from personal to lethal professionalism. "Yes, boss," one of them replied, nodding toward the entrance. A sleek black car idled at the curb, windows tinted, engine humming with quiet threat. The kind of vehicle that promised safety on the outside and danger within. As we approached, I felt a knot of dread tightening inside my chest, because this moment, stepping into his world again, was a line I could not uncross. He opened the door for me, one hand on the roof, the other steadying my back. And even though the gesture was gentle, almost polite, I knew better. It was a claim, disguised as courtesy. I paused, fingers trembling at the threshold. "I don't want to go with you," I whispered, though the words lacked force. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his eyes dark and certain and impossibly consuming. "You already are." And then he guided me inside. The seat was soft, warm from the heater, but it felt like stepping into a gilded cage, the door closing with a heavy, resolute thud that echoed in my chest. He slid in beside me, the driver pulling away smoothly the moment he fastened his seatbelt, and the city began to blur past the windows in streaks of gray and gold. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I stared ahead, watching the world I had lived in these last 3 years disappear behind us, mile by mile, breath by breath, while the world I had once belonged to, the world of polished danger and silent violence and intoxicating loyalty, stretched before me like a road paved with broken promises. "You should have told me sooner," he said at last, his voice low, almost contemplative. "Told you what?" I asked, though the tremor in my voice betrayed the dread curling inside me. "That someone was hunting you," he said, his gaze fixed on the passing streets. "That you were in danger." I swallowed hard. I had my reasons. He turned then slowly, his eyes locking onto mine with unyielding certainty. "I'll find them," he said, "every last one." And something in his tone told me he would. Even the ones I never wanted him to uncover. Especially the one I'd been running from all this time. As the car turned onto the street leading to his penthouse, the fortress I once called home, my pulse quickened, because I knew what waited behind those walls. Questions, accusations, and truths I could no longer outrun. And that is why, as the city grew smaller in the rearview mirror, and his world rose around me once more, I realized with ice-cold clarity that the real danger wasn't the men chasing me, but the moment he discovered what I had been hiding from him for 3 long, desperate years. It is a peculiar thing to stand inside the place you once fled, to breathe air heavy with echoes of a life you swore you had buried, and to realize with a slow, creeping certainty that your escape was never truly an escape, merely a pause between chapters you weren't brave enough, or perhaps not ready enough, to finish. And as I stood on the balcony of his penthouse with the city stretched beneath me in glittering veins of light, I felt the weight of every decision I had made pressed against my shoulders, like hands urging me forward into a confession that could reshape both of our lives in ways neither of us could pull back from once spoken. Behind me, through the open glass doors, I could hear him pacing the living room with that quiet, controlled agitation he only revealed when something mattered too much for words, the kind of tension that filled the space like a storm ready to break. And even though he hadn't said a single sentence in the last several minutes, I could feel the gravity of his presence tugging at me, pulling me toward a truth that had been clawing at my throat from the moment he found me in that hospital bed. The city wind curled around my hair, lifting strands like question marks, asking me if I was ready to dismantle the final wall between us. And for the first time since returning to his world, I felt that strange, fragile thread of courage that comes only when you've already lost so much there is hardly anything left worth fearing. "You're avoiding me," he said behind me, and though the words were quiet, they rippled through me with a force that made my breath catch. "I'm thinking," I replied, not turning yet, because facing him felt like stepping into a storm you aren't sure you'll survive intact. "You only think like that when you're about to do something reckless." I let out a breath, long, heavy, uneven, because he wasn't wrong. He had never been wrong about me, not in the ways that mattered, and the terrible intimacy of being known like that by someone you had once loved so recklessly it nearly consumed you was both grounding and suffocating. "I owe you the truth," I said, finally turning to face him. He stopped pacing, his eyes locking onto mine with the kind of unwavering attention that made the rest of the world fall quiet. And in that stillness, I felt the fragility of the moment, the tremble of its importance, as though the universe itself leaned in to listen. "I knew," I said softly, The moment I saw you in the hospital that I couldn't keep running, that you would pull the truth out of me one way or another, so I might as well give it willingly." His jaw clenched, not in anger, but in something deeper. Fear, perhaps, or the ghost of it, because for all his power, the truth had always been the one thing he couldn't drag out of me by force, and he knew enough about me to recognize the tremor beneath my voice. "I'm listening," he said. And so I told him. Not everything at once, not in some dramatic wave of confession, but in slow, uneven sentences that felt like opening a locked box that had gathered dust and dread in equal measure. I told him about the man who had followed me across cities, not because I had wronged him, but because I had seen something I wasn't meant to see. A simple moment in a deserted alley, a whispered exchange, a threat that spiraled into something far larger than my fear. I told him about the night I fled, heart hammering, lungs burning, the weight of knowing I could either disappear or drag him into a war he didn't know existed. I told him how long I had stayed hidden, how every knock on every door felt like a countdown, how I convinced myself staying away from him was safer than begging for help, from the one man who had always been both my shelter and my undoing. And then I told him the part that cracked something open inside me even as I said it. "I didn't call you as my emergency contact," I whispered. "I listed you years ago, back when I still lived here, and I forgot to change it after I left." His expression shifted, softened, darkened all at once. "That's why you didn't want me there," he murmured, "because letting me in meant admitting you never really left me behind." I closed my eyes, because the truth of it pierced directly through me. "You were never a loose thread I could cut," I said. "You were the knot I kept pretending I could unravel." Silence washed over the room, heavy and intimate. A silence filled not with anger, but with recognition. The shared ache of two people who had spent years orbiting the memory of each other. He approached then, not with the commanding stride he used with everyone else, but with the slow, deliberate steps of someone approaching something fragile, someone who understood that the wrong move could shatter what remained. When he reached me, he didn't touch me immediately. He merely stood close enough that the warmth of him seeped into my skin, steadying my breath and unraveling me all at once. "That man who came after you," he said quietly, "he's been dealt with." I opened my eyes, searching his face, worried for what "dealt with" might mean. But he must have sensed my fear because he shook his head slightly. "No violence," he said. "Not this time. Just leverage, pressure, the kind that convinces men to leave what isn't theirs alone." Relief washed over me, warm, unexpected, overwhelming. Because for years, I had convinced myself that the only version of him that existed was the ruthless one, the one who carved solutions out of shadows and threat. But here he was showing me a part of himself I had once known intimately, the part capable of restraint when it mattered. I exhaled slowly, tension draining from muscles I hadn't realized were clenched. "Thank you," I whispered. "You don't have to thank me," he said, his voice tight, almost strained. "I should have protected you before any of this happened." "That's not fair," I said gently. "You didn't know. And even if you had, I wasn't yours to protect anymore." His gaze dropped to the floor, jaw working, breath heavy. "You were always mine," he said, "even when you hated the idea, even when you ran." There was no dominance in his voice this time, no possessive edge, no demand, just the simple confession of a truth we both had lived with for years. "And I think," I said slowly, "that I spent a very long time pretending I wasn't still yours in some way, because admitting it felt too dangerous." "Dangerous how?" he asked, stepping closer. "Because loving you," I whispered, "was the easiest thing I ever did, and the hardest thing to survive." For a moment he closed his eyes, as though the words struck him in a place he had never let anyone touch, and when he opened them again, The raw intensity within them made my chest constrict. "I can't change who I am," he said, voice barely audible. "I can't give you some quiet, peaceful life. I can't pretend I don't walk in a world full of risks and shadows, but I can promise you one thing. I will never be the reason you're afraid again." A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it, and he reached up slowly, so slowly it nearly undid me, touching my skin with a tenderness that contradicted every rumor about him, every story whispered in fear or awe. "I don't want the quiet life," I said. "I just want to stop running. I'm tired, and I'm done pretending that leaving you kept me safe when the truth is, I only ever felt safe with you." Something in him broke then, not violently but quietly, the way ice melts beneath sunlight, slowly giving way to warmth that had been waiting beneath the surface. He cupped my cheek, thumb brushing the last trace of a tear. "Then stay," he whispered. "Not because you have nowhere else to go, not because you're scared, but because you want to. Stay with me." "I want to," I breathed. The admission lifted something heavy from my chest, something I had carried so long it had become part of my posture, my breath, my heartbeat. He pulled me into him then, arms wrapping around me with a gentleness that felt like forgiveness, like homecoming, like rewriting every moment of pain with something steadier, something whole, something undeniably ours. We stood like that for a long time, wrapped in the kind of silence that has nothing left to hide, the kind that softens the sharpest edges, the kind that feels like coming up for air after drowning for years. When I finally pulled back, his eyes followed every movement, as though memorizing the new version of me, the woman who had stopped running, the woman choosing him again not out of desperation or fear, but out of clarity. "What happens now?" I asked. He took my hand, threading his fingers through mine with a certainty that settled something deep in my ribcage. "Now," he said, "we build something new. Not what we had before. Better." I nodded, feeling that promise settle inside me like a seed ready to root. "And what about the past?" I asked softly. "What do we do with everything we lost?" He squeezed my hand. "We don't forget it," he said. "We learn from it. We carry it. And then we let it become something that makes us stronger, not something that chains us." I looked out over the city again, light shimmering like a constellation of choices. Paths we had taken, roads we could still walk, futures we could shape if we were brave enough to claim them. For the first time in years, I felt the sharp, exhilarating edge of hope. Not the naive hope I had once carried, but something tempered by pain and loss and survival, something wiser, sturdier, more enduring. A quiet breath left me, carried away by the wind. "Okay," I whispered. "Let's begin again." His fingers tightened around mine. "We already have." And there, on a balcony overlooking a city we had both bled for and survived, I felt the truth settle around us like dusk turning gently into night. That love is not the absence of fear or danger or shadows, but the choice to keep reaching towards someone even when the world tries to pull you apart. We were not perfect. We were not without scars. We were not the people we once were. But we were here. Together. Choosing each other not despite the darkness but through it. And sometimes that is enough. Sometimes that is everything. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it, and he reached up slowly, so slowly it nearly undid me, fingertips hovering just short of my skin, as though he was giving me the chance to step back, to refuse him, to confirm with a single movement that the distance I had put between us was still the boundary I wanted. I didn't move. Maybe I should have. Maybe that would have been the smarter choice, the safer choice. But safety had never been the language we spoke with each other. His thumb brushed the tear away with a tenderness that made my knees weaken, made my ribs ache in new ways, made the truth inside me claw harder at the walls I'd built to contain it. "Elena," he murmured, barely breathing the word. "You don't have to be afraid of me." But I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid of what I was about to say, of what it would mean, of the world it would drag both of us into again. He must have seen something shift in my eyes, because he stilled, hand frozen against my cheek, gaze sharpening with the kind of focus he reserved only for the moments that mattered. "What is it?" he asked, voice low, steady, dangerous in its gentleness. "There's more. I can feel it." My throat tightened. This was the moment, the cliff edge, the truth I had carried alone for 3 years, tucked beneath my ribs, hidden beneath aliases and lies and constant running. "I need you to promise me something," I whispered. He went rigid, a subtle tightening of his shoulders, a faint narrowing of his eyes, but he didn't pull away. "Tell me," he said. "Promise you won't react," I said. "Not until I finish." A humorless sound escaped him, half laugh, half disbelief. "You're asking a lot." "I know," my voice wavered, "but I need it." After a long moment, long enough that my heart stuttered painfully, he nodded. "I promise," he said, and though it wasn't a vow most people would trust, it was enough for me. He never made promises lightly. I inhaled. I exhaled. I stepped off the edge. "The night I left," I began, but the words tangled in my throat. I pressed my palms against the rail of the balcony, grounding myself. I wasn't just running from danger. I wasn't just scared for myself. He waited, silent, still, watching me with the kind of focus that made my skin buzz. "I was pregnant," I whispered. The world didn't stop. But he did. Every muscle in his body went stone still, like someone had pressed pause on him alone. His breath caught, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a tiny, involuntary way that told me the truth had pierced deeper than any blade ever could. "For 3 years," I continued, voice cracking, "I kept him hidden. I kept both of us hidden. Because I knew what your world would do to a child. Because I knew what your enemies would do to him if they knew he existed. Because I knew what you would do if you ever found out." He blinked once. Just once. Slowly. "Elena," he said, voice so quiet it scraped against my bones. "Where is he?" My eyes burned. "He's safe," I said. "He's always been safe." "Where?" he repeated, the word no longer a question but a command wrapped in shaking restraint. I swallowed. "With someone I trust." His chest rose and fell in a single, uneven breath, the only visible crack in the armor he'd worn since the moment he walked into that hospital room. "You had my child," he said, each word trembling with something raw, dangerous, and heartbreakingly human. "You carried him. You raised him. Alone." "I did," I whispered. His hands curled into fists at his sides, knuckles whitening, jaw tightening with a fury so deep I could almost feel it radiating from him. But he didn't explode, didn't shout, didn't lash out. He held himself together by sheer force of will. "You ran," he said, voice trembling like a blade held too tight. "Not from me, not from danger. You ran, to protect him." I nodded, tears slipping freely now. His eyes closed. When they opened again, they were wet. "Is he?" His voice broke for the first time since I had known him. "Is he healthy?" "Yes." "Is he happy?" "Yes." His breath shuddered out of him like a man surviving something instead of breaking. "And you think," he whispered, taking one small step closer, "that I wouldn't have burned the entire world to the ground to keep him safe?" "That's exactly why I ran," I cried. "Because you would have, and you would have died for it, or killed for it, or both." He dragged a hand through his hair, pacing 2 steps before stopping, gripping the back of the sofa like he needed it to stay upright. "Elena," he said, turning toward me with a look that hollowed me out entirely. I need to see him. A sob tore from my chest. I know, I whispered, and you will. He closed the distance between us in 2 steps, cupping my face with both hands, forehead lowering to mine. His voice was a whisper, raw and reverent. He's mine? He's yours. And you're sure? He breathed. One look at him, I said hoarsely, and you won't need me to answer that. He let out a broken, disbelieving sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Elena, he whispered, his thumb brushing away another tear. You should have told me. I know. I would have protected you both. I know. I would have chosen you. I know. He swallowed hard, voice barely holding together. When do I meet him? And that was the moment I realized there was no going back. Not for me, not for him, not for any of us. I took a shaky breath. Tomorrow, I whispered, if you're ready. He shook his head, eyes burning. No, he said. Tonight. And the way he said it, quiet, reverent, unstoppable, told me everything. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. And this time, I wasn't sure if it would destroy us or save us. Tonight, he said again, quieter this time, as though repeating it made it real, made it something the universe now had to obey. My breath hitched, not because I didn't expect it. A part of me always knew he wouldn't wait, but because of the weight in his voice, the urgency, the desperation he wasn't bothering to hide anymore. Are you sure? I whispered. His jaw flexed, the answer instant. I've waited 3 years, he said. I'm done waiting. I closed my eyes. His nearness was overwhelming. Not in the dangerous way it used to be. Not like a fire about to burn me, but like warmth after too long in the cold. Okay, I breathed, but you need to listen to me carefully. He went still, fully, immediately, like his body recognized the seriousness before his mind did. Whatever it is, he murmured, I'll do it. I looked up, meeting his eyes. You can't arrive with guards. You can't be followed. You can't bring weapons. You need to come alone, and unseen. His expression didn't change, but something sharpened behind it. That's not a problem. You say that, I said, but the last time you tried to go somewhere alone, 5 of your men trailed you in 2 cars. He exhaled through his nose, almost a laugh, but not quite. They won't this time. I mean it, I insisted. If anyone sees you, they'll know something's wrong. And if they know something's wrong, they'll start looking. And if they start looking... I understand, he said gently, stepping closer. Elena, I understand. His hand brushed mine, barely, but the contact sent something electric down my spine. What's the address? He asked. I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because giving him that address meant opening the last door I'd kept closed. The door that separated my past from the life I built after leaving him. The life built around a small boy with amber-flecked eyes and a stubborn jawline that didn't come from me. He saw my hesitation, and his features softened. You're not giving me a target, he murmured. You're giving me my son. My chest tightened painfully. He's sleeping right now, I said. I don't want to wake him. He gets scared when strangers are near. The word stranger seemed to cut him, but he didn't flinch. I won't wake him, he promised. I just need to see him. The way he said it undid me entirely. I gave him the address. Quietly, deliberately, every number like handing over a piece of myself I'd never meant to surrender. When I finished, he repeated it back to me with perfect precision. Then again, under his breath, like a vow. He pulled out his phone, then paused, looking up at me as if asking permission for even that. I need to let them know I'm unavailable for the night, he said, so they don't look for me. That was new. Once upon a time, he wouldn't have explained. He wouldn't have asked. He simply would have done. I nodded. He typed something short, then locked the phone without waiting for a reply and slipped it into his pocket. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "That I'm not to be disturbed," he said. "For any reason." My stomach flipped. He stepped closer again, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, smell that clean, familiar mix of cedar and smoke and something uniquely him that I'd spent years trying to forget. He touched my chin lightly, tilting my face up toward his. "Elena," he whispered, "can I ask you something?" I swallowed. "Yes." His eyes searched mine, slowly, painfully thorough. "Did you ever stop loving me?" The question landed like a blow. I opened my mouth, then closed it, words tangling in the ache of my throat. I looked away, but he gently guided my chin back. "Tell me," he murmured. "Please." My defenses crumbled, not all at once, not dramatically, just softly, the way cliffs erode from years of tide wearing them down. "No," I whispered. I never stopped. His breath left him in a slow, uneven exhale, like the confession pierced something inside him that had been locked tight for too long. He leaned in, not to kiss me, but to rest his forehead against mine, his hands framing my face with a tenderness that contradicted every violent thing he'd ever done. "I'm leaving now," he said quietly. "If I stay, I won't." My pulse stuttered. "Won't what?" His voice was a low rasp. "I won't be able to walk away from you." Silence hummed between us, full, thick, electric. He stepped back, just one step, but it felt like the ground shifted with it. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, he said. "Drive carefully." He gave a small, humorless smile. For the first time in my life, I might. He turned toward the door, hesitating just long enough for me to feel it, then walked out. The moment the door closed, my knees nearly buckled. Because 30 minutes from now, the two worlds I had kept apart for 3 years would finally collide, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again.